good afternoon from England, Wales and Southern Ireland, and a good morning to Philadelphia. Welcome everybody to our ACES Trauma Informed Practice session on collaborative leadership to deliver ACES and Trauma Informed Practice. Firstly, it's a bit of an apology from Chief Constable Andy Rhodes. We are going to hear from him today. He has done a pre-recorded session from us, but unfortunately he's been pulled away to an urgent operational matter. So he's asked me to step in this morning. My name's Justin Srivastava. I'm a superintendent from Lancashire Police, and I also, on behalf of the National Police Chiefs Council, do a lot of work around trauma-informed policing and public health approaches in policing. And I'm really honoured and I'm very happy to have a number of esteemed panellists today that you're going to hear from. So I'm going to get each one to introduce themselves. Can we start with yourself, please, Aoife?
Yeah, hello everybody. My name's Aoife Dermody and I'm a researcher and co-founder in Quality Matters, which is a research charity based in the Republic of Ireland. We work nationally. On this project that we're talking about today, we worked in partnership with Colette and An Garda Síochána there. Thank you.
Thanks, Aoife. And that's a lovely line in to Colette from Garda Síochána. So Colette, could you introduce yourself, please?
I can indeed. Hello, everybody. And again, like that, a very big welcome, or as we say in Ireland, a Céad Míle Fáilte from Ireland. I'm here, I'm the Chief Superintendent in charge of our Garda Youth Diversion Bureau. And that means in Ireland, we have a national bureau that looks after all our children under 18 who commit or are alleged to have committed criminal offences. And we have a police-led diversion programme. So as Aoife said, we work together on the whole trauma-informed care. And we ran a very successful project, which we'll tell you more about as the presentation goes on. And we hope to do more. And now with Justin and some of our colleagues in the UK getting on board this lovely opportunity that we've had to join you guys today with the Law Enforcement and Public Health Conference, that means that we can maybe share our learning more broadly. So thank you, and look forward to hearing more from you.
Thanks, Colette. And last but by no means least, Jo.
Thank you very much. Good morning, afternoon, whatever time it is. Very pleased to join you today to talk a little bit about what we've been doing in Wales. I'm from Public Health Wales, and I'm also the director of the Adverse Childhood Experiences Support Hub, be careful to say that, and also previously Programme Director for the Early Action Together programme, both big programmes that have been looking at trauma-informed practice, ACE awareness in policing and taking a public health approach. So really pleased to be able to contribute to this today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you very much. And what we're going to do is going to play 4 pre-recorded inputs, presentations. And at the end, we're going to have a question and answer panel. So I'm quite excited about that. If you can start typing some questions into the sidebar, and we'll try and get through as many as we can during the course of today. So thank you very much. Over to you, Dee, for the first video, please. I think we're having some problem with the audio there. Sorry about this, ladies and gents. We'll just try and get the audio sorted for us.
Sorry about that. All right, try this.
We're still struggling here, Dee. Nope, still not getting the audio, I don't think.
Sorry, you still can't hear?
No.
No?
Nothing.
Oh,
It
no,
worked
it was
perfectly
working
before, as
before.
well, didn't it?
It was working before.
Do you want to try one of the other videos and see if that works? We'll come back to that. Yeah, one of the, in the chat bar, someone's saying that they got no audio in the UK.
All right, we'll try.
Yeah, some people are getting audio and some people not, apparently. I'm not getting any audio at all.
So I'm just going to talk to you.
There we go.
Is there audio with this one?
It's just come on now.
It just come on?
No, it's gone.
Sorry, everybody. I don't know if this was working when we tested it out before we started. Okay, yeah, some say. All right. Looks like some can hear and some cannot. All right, Joe, you said you'd be happy to present live.
Yeah,
Joe?
I can do that if that would be preferable. It'll get us going
Yeah,
anyway.
absolutely.
Sure,
Thank you.
that would be great. I'm going to promote you to everybody to host so that you can also share.
Okay, are you happy for me to go first, Justin?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, then let me have a go at, sorry, everybody else. I'll just see if I can get. Now I've got to find my slides.
It's not live technology that lets us down, isn't it? Not the pre-recorded one.
It always is, isn't it? It always is. Right, hopefully.
Eva, are you okay to go next live after this? Brilliant. Sorry about this, everyone. We'll be with you in a second or two.
Right. Can we see this?
Yes.
We can.
Yeah.
Oh, hooray. Right, let's make a start then. As I said in my introduction, I'm Jo Hopkins, Programme Director for Adverse Childhood Experiences, Criminal Justice and Violence Prevention in Public Health Wales. And I have responsibility for two programmes that you can see the logos of at the top of this slide. But what I'm going to do today is just take you through our journey of becoming, and our still journey of becoming a trauma-informed nation. So how these programmes have brought collective leadership together to take us from becoming more aware of what adverse childhood experiences are, and then really translating that into difference in terms of practice, in terms of knowledge, and in terms of how we really kind of transform systems in Wales. So part of what we are trying to do is create a shared vision and a shared common understanding of what it is that would make a trauma-informed nation. So we have, as I said, the programmes that I'm responsible for directly, which are the Adverse Childhood Experiences Support Hub, and that's funded by the Welsh Government and has been for the last 4 years, and I'm really pleased to say will continue to be funded into next year. And that's really looking at what we call devolved matters in Wales, so services that are responsible for the looking after people, but they are devolved to the Welsh Government. So some things like the policing is UK government responsibility, things like health, education, housing, social services are the responsibility of the Welsh Government. So we have a kind of a partnership arrangement here that needs to look across those responsibilities and bring them together. So the ACE Support Hub is the Welsh contribution from the Welsh Government to ensure that the services that they're responsible for are working in this way. Then we've got the Early Action Together programme, which was a Home Office UK government funded programme over the last 3 years, a significant funding investment into that programme to look at policing and partners approach to adverse childhood experiences, to a public health approach to policing, and to really test and evaluate. And that's the key for this one, a big investment from Public Health Wales for research and evaluation to understand what works, what doesn't work, and then to test and take forward. And then the third cog that you can see here on the left is the Violence Prevention Unit, which other parts of the UK will have violence reduction units. This again is funded by the Home Office UK government. But we in Wales decided that we wanted to call ours a violence prevention unit, not because we think we've got less violence to reduce, more because we want our focus to absolutely be a public health approach to violence prevention, so that we look at the primary prevention aspects as well as helping and supporting people as they become known to the criminal justice system. So collectively, all these programmes, some funded by Welsh Government, some funded by UK government, need to pull together and to agree what it is we're all trying to achieve for this to become that shared vision. So we all agree that breaking the cycle of adverse childhood experiences is key, enabling a whole system response to vulnerability through trauma-informed approaches, and I'll come back to what that actually means in practice. Having a competent, confident and compassionate workforce. So this isn't just about the people we are serving or trying to support, or our customers or service users, however we might describe them. It's also about ourselves and our organisations and our workforce being able to recognise the importance of a trauma-informed approach for ourselves as well as people that we are working with and for. And as I said, real key to this is thinking about prevention in this space. What is it we can all do to understand what prevention means, to stop things from occurring in the first place? And then when they do, can we get in support early enough to make sure those interventions are able to prevent further issues or to mitigate against them? And then thirdly, thinking about those wider determinants of why adversity and trauma happen, and what can we do for some people who are going to experience this, but perhaps don't have access to some of the factors that help them to manage that and to overcome adversity. So we know it's not a predestined outcome that if you experience adversity in childhood, that you'll go on to enter the criminal justice system, of course not. But some people have more opportunity to access the sorts of things that enable them to be able to cope and to be able to live full and good lives. So I'm sure we'll hear a lot from all of our speakers about what we mean by trauma informed, but I just thought it was important to set out what we mean in Wales, because there is some debate at the moment, I think, and a healthy debate around what is it that we all mean when we use these words. There's some very clear, more clinical definitions around trauma, and there's also a more universal approach, which is the one that I'm talking about in Wales. Our plan with these programmes was never to medicalise people, was never to say, we know what's best for you. It's more about taking an approach that understands that how we can be trauma informed in our practice, just in case, effectively, somebody has experienced this in their lives. We don't want to assume, we don't want to presume, but we must understand that the way that we behave and the way that we operate needs to take account of the fact that somebody may have experienced adversity and trauma. So putting safety at the centre of what we do to ensure that both physical and emotional safety is the core part of our principles. Choice, ensuring that staff, if it's an internal conversation, and those outside of our organisations have some choice and control, because by giving people choice and control, if that empowers them, which is another point further down. But also we want people to feel like they have options, and that if they've had that taken away, this is a huge impactful thing to give back. Collaboration, which we'll come on to in a minute, maximising those opportunities to do things together. That's the only way that a system can be transformed. Empowerment, and prioritising those empowerment conversations and those opportunities to build skills and capacity. And then finally, trust, which I think is probably the thing that binds all of this together. So that's what we use, and that's how we understand trauma-informed approaches. As I said, it's more universal, moving up to a slightly more targeted level. But when you get into specific specialist pathways for people who've experienced certain adversities that may require a more specialist response, then of course we would move into a different conversation around that. So if we understand this as the base principle, what is it that we are doing in Wales to try and get that common shared understanding? And one of the things that the ACE Support Hub in particular has been trying to develop is something we've called TRACE, which is Trauma and ACE Aware. And it's a set of resources, a toolkit that enables organisations to come at this and say, right, what is it that we need to be thinking about? What is it we need to do? Because what we don't want to happen is that for this to be a tick box exercise, to be a prescribed, this is, if you tick all these boxes, you can then become trauma informed. Actually, it's a very individual conversation, both at a community level, at an organisational level, and even, perhaps between individuals themselves in terms of understanding where they are in order to understand where they get to. So there's a whole framework that the organisations in this example would be able to look at. Oh, what's happened there? It's jumped away. Would be able to look at and do a self-assessment plan effectively for what it is that they do need to do. So it's not just about we just need some training. It might be what sort of training do we need? What gaps do we have? How then do we actually embed this in the ethos and culture of our organisation? So it's providing that toolkit to enable them to go on to that journey, using the resources that we've already identified and thinking about what those needs are. So this is something that we've really tried to develop and pilot in Wales, and hopefully we'll be able to see some results of this. But early findings are that organisations find it very helpful to have something to work with and to be able to access those resources and really know that they are using something that's trusted and tested. There's a lot of stuff out there at the moment, and really just to help us all to pull in that same direction. But it's not like we've started with that and that's the only thing we've done. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we've done a huge amount working with sectors in Wales. And here's just an example of some of the areas that we've been doing work with. Some tremendous work on psychologically informed environments when we're looking at housing and homelessness, education. The ACE Hub has supported training and development across 2/3 of our schools in Wales. And we have a cascade model, a train the trainer system effectively, which means that all schools in Wales will have the opportunity both to access resources and training on how to become more aware of what ACEs are and how to become trauma informed in practice in the education system, which is really the underpinning, I think, of what we're trying to achieve. We've also worked with youth service and youth justice, working with sports, which is really interesting because this is about those resilience factors, thinking about what opportunities people might have. It's not just about sport, is what we call the training, because it's really about understanding how to connect those trusted adult relationships that we all know are really important. So this just gives you a flavour of the kind of breadth of work really in Wales that's been going on. The trick really, I think, is to pull this all together in a way that doesn't silo and re-silo the sectors we're working with, and to work across, as I said, that devolved and non-devolved environment, because people in Wales don't go, oh, I don't know, is that the Welsh Government thing or is that an England thing? They just want to be able to access the support and services that they need. So really it's about bringing all that together. And that's where this collective leadership is so important. I just want to take you very quickly through some of the examples that we have from the Early Action Together programme, which I said was the police and partners work, and I think is probably of most interest to people attending this conference. And this was, as I said, the Home Office funded programme that's lasted for the last 3 years, all 4 police forces in Wales, for Her Majesty's Probation and Prison Service. A whole range of partners were involved in this. This was a true multi-agency programme, which meant A, it was quite a challenge because it was so big, but B, it meant that for the first time, I think we had that collective understanding, that shared ambition of what it was that we were trying to aim for in terms of ACE awareness and trauma-informed practice. So here are the 4 key objectives of the work: to build that competent and confident workforce, to build organisational capacity and capability to be able to respond to the demands that policing and the wider criminal justice has, to try and put together a 24/7 connected response, so signposting, supporting, safeguarding, and then ultimately that whole system approach, not just tinkering in one bit and hoping for the best. This was about working out what made a difference. And some of the principles of doing this were really carefully thought about. So this isn't about just working, ad hoc all over the place. Here is a symptom of what's happening, and just treating that, to use more health-based language. This is looking at the system as a whole, and trying to understand what it is that's at the root cause of the problem. Thinking about people, so we're all very used to processes, we're all used to following processes through, but actually what does it mean for the person who's experiencing that process? How do we re-traumatize people actually sometimes when they're going through our processes by the things that we do or ask or actions that we take? And it's also thinking more about how do we do things differently, not just bolting on, because we bolt on and then we forget the purpose that we started with. So it's really important to look at what we're doing, why we're doing it, and work within that to do something different. Lead by evidence. This is not about assuming that this might work. It's about testing, exploring, and that's a key element of a public health approach. And as I said, building into, not onto. We don't just want to pile on top of stuff that's not working. We need to really understand what is working and make sure that we build into it. And I'll just quickly highlight some of the key success areas that this programme brought, not least because we've done an extensive amount of research that backs this up. So if people are interested, I can put the link in the chat. We've got a website that's got all of the research and evaluation for you to have a look at. But some of the kind of key aspects of this, and I think these are the outcomes of collective leadership. This is why you can really see the value of doing things in this way. So we have police and partners, a range of partners, reporting improved knowledge and awareness, increased confidence in working with vulnerable people. We had officers submitting better quality referrals. So we have a huge amount of safeguarding referrals that get put through. Many just fall back again because they're insufficient, they don't have the right level of detail, or they could be signposted to somewhere else. So that's improved, and we've made sure that people are getting the help that they need. That increased collaboration with partners, that integrated front door. So when someone rings asking for help or support or advice, they get the right person to speak to. They don't just get fobbed off. And thinking about building into those local systems, understanding how they work, understanding how police and partners can work together. So that's a real finding that local approach and understanding the context was really important. Also, as I said, one of the key aspects of this was around thinking about how does the work support the staff themselves. So you've got initiatives that really try to address some of the stigma we have in our society, and it's the same across the world around mental health, and really thinking about supporting self-care. We also had a broader community impact, so helping to think about how we work with our families and communities to make them more aware of adversity in childhood and what they can do, and that development of that whole system approach. So looking at criminal justice, youth justice settings, right across the spectrum. And not to be too short about this, but there is a cost impact here. And actually, by doing all this work, we've avoided costs that otherwise would be taken on by all agencies. So those alternative pathways actually reduce the costs of the overall interventions. And there's evidence here of increased collaboration and integration. So the whole point around starting this programme was having that collective leadership. But as the programme developed, that leadership deepened, that collaboration deepened, that integration deepened. So we all understand better what it is that's being achieved by everybody. And I think that's a really important outcome. And just very quickly, as I wrap up, as I mentioned before, we've done a lot of work thinking about education in schools. But one of the aspects I wanted to draw out in terms of the policing part of this is that not only do we want schools to be strong, inclusive and trauma-informed, but actually we want them to be viewing of our policing as part of their community. So we've got this lovely thing called Hedleyback, which is Welsh and it means mini police. So in some of our schools, we've got young people and children working with the police to kind of develop that sense of understanding about the wider work that the police do. Now, some of these children may have experienced criminal justice system themselves, their families, for negative reasons. And what we found is that by engaging them in this way, they've gone back to those families and given a different perspective, reinforce some of the positive community-based actions that the police can take. They're not to be feared. They're not just here to arrest you. Actually, there's a lot more. And the kind of conversations that take place around this are really, really positive and full of hope, I think, in terms of that presentation of what we can all do together. So we're really proud of that. And there's tremendous feedback from the children who take part. As I mentioned as well, another positive is thinking about those psychologically informed environments. So not just changing the way that you operate with people, but changing the physical environment in which you're operating. So the housing and homelessness work looks at very much not only at the relationships and the training, but that environment, the psychological framework underpinning, and really kind of looking at how the evidence can support change. So you can see here on the right hand side, we had some really, really powerful outcomes from this work. Huge reductions in things like hospital admissions, ambulance call out, serious incidents, and also positively evictions, although slightly going up to start with as everybody got used to it, then coming down quite considerably. So really positive outcomes of this piece of work. And in terms of policing and wider outcomes, I think the key things are around changes in operational practice, improved referrals, as I said, appropriateness, appropriate safeguarding referrals, not just shoving them up because that's the only course of action that people know to do. Increasing the number of referrals received by early help, so we're getting in there as early as we can, more appropriate and timely support, and good problem solving to vulnerability, not just parceling people off as you know, you need to access this service and that'll be the end of it, because we know that people will come round if they don't get the right support. So developing that problem solving ability and then better working relationships as an outcome of that. And really quickly, here's an example of how positive impact can make such a huge difference. So we have a case study of somebody who has, before the Early Action Together programme, been in contact with the police numerous times, lots of concerns around alcohol, concerns about gaining alcohol through false ID, associations with people perpetuating this problem, going missing, and eventually getting arrested. So this is the picture of a person who is now in the criminal justice system. But after the Early Action Together programme, the outcome for this person and how they are treated within the system is very different. So by taking that trauma-informed approach, by understanding the root causes and what's happening to this person, we see reduced numbers of going missing, less concerns about alcohol, more involved in things like dance and recreational activities that are positive, less concerns from social services. So but the whole approach has changed the life of the person that has come into the system and actually they're no longer in the system. So what we've seen is a 36% reduction in these sorts of things, and I think, and a 66% reduction there. So I think these are really, really positive kind of outcomes from the overall programme. And then just to conclude, one of the things that's really often asked is, for these big programs, this is all great, but what actually have you done? What's the difference? Have you got some tangible outcomes, some models that we could do now, that we could upscale, that could be put across the UK or wider? And I think we have. We think we've got some stuff from each of the forces that could be really helpful. And this is where that collective leadership is so important, isn't it? Because if you didn't do it in this way, then North Wales would be doing great stuff with early help pathways, as you can see here. Gwent would be doing great stuff with integrated front doors. Dyfed Powys is doing great stuff with resilience and self-care. South Wales developing that model for responding to vulnerability and rethinking how you treat people in the crisis. If we didn't have that collective leadership in Wales, we wouldn't be able to put all this together and have a model that enables us to do all of these things. And lot forgetting within all of this, of course, we've got our communities, our society, and our ambition is not just to transform public service or to transform individual organisations. It's actually to think about Wales and how we can transform it into a trauma and ACE-informed community at large. So we've got a lot of work to do, lots of exciting stuff. We're starting with the sectors, as I've said, we're moving into the communities. We're thinking about trying to be kindness and compassion being at the root cause of this, and really working with communities to understand these definitions. What does it mean to put resilience front and centre, and then thinking about how we upscale and adapt. So really, we just want to make sure that we put the knowledge of ACEs and trauma into the hands of the public, because they will create very wise decisions. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jo, for that excellent chat through what's happening in Wales. I'm looking forward to the chat bar lighting up with some questions. I've certainly got a few, and I understand we may have resolved some of our technical issues. But Aoife, if you're happy, are you happy to carry on live?
Absolutely.
Rather than trying to. Fantastic. Can I hand over to you then, Aoife, please?
Yeah, it's nice to do it live because you kind of miss the energy of being in a room with people. So something that's a little bit, the more of a possibility to mess up makes it a bit more exciting and fun, doesn't it? Jo, thanks. That was really inspiring and really exciting and lovely to hear that work is going on and being done so considerately in Wales. I look forward to reading lots more about it. Thanks so much for that. And thanks to the conference organizers for having us. We're really excited to be here. I find it particularly inspiring, you know, at this time where the world seems to be almost in limbo and on hold, to see that so many people are still really dedicating their time to making things better and trying to improve things is just really inspiring to bear witness to and to be around. So I'm very glad to be here. So yeah, I work in an organization that supports other nonprofit organizations. One of our major projects in Quality Matters is we also provide trauma-informed practice training to quite a broad range of social health, community and criminal justice professionals. So we've trained about 1,500 people in trauma-informed working. And this was a piece of research we did around kind of the prevalence of trauma among young people. So let me tell you just quickly background to the research, because I just really want to acknowledge our partner, our research partner, Dr. Sharon Lambert in UCC, who would certainly be considered one of our national experts around trauma and trauma-informed practice. So we did this in partnership with her, and it was commissioned by an organization called Youth Rise, who promote kind of sensible drug policy. And of course, I don't think I need to highlight to anyone in the room the connection between substance use, drug policy, and of course policing and trauma among young people. So I'm grateful to them. And then it was funded and done in partnership with An Garda Síochána and funded through the Robert Carr Fund. Now, An Garda Síochána, Colette will tell you more. My colleague who's in the Irish Police Force will tell you more about that. But when you see the word Garda, G-A-R-D-A, that just means police. So for those of you who may not be familiar with that. So we did research called an exploration of early life trauma and implications for Garda Youth Diversion Services. What Garda Youth Diversion Services are, and I know the model is replicated internationally, is those people employed in the Garda who deal with children under 18 with a view to kind of preventing their engagement with the criminal justice system progressing into something, you know, more serious. So it's the word diversion means really diversion from a more serious engagement with the criminal justice service. So they are all over the country in Ireland, and Colette will tell you more about that. But for your information, it's the young people who are coming into contact with the criminal justice system, and that's who the research was done with. So what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is just tell you what we did. It was kind of a creative enough methodology where we want to protect, you know, the anonymity and well-being of young people. So we took a creative enough methodology around it. I'll tell you what young people who were involved in the study. I'll tell you about their ACE scores and show you what that means, because ACE scores get a lot more meaning when you compare them to ACE scores of the general population. If you don't know what ACE scores are, ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experience, and it's a scale. There's a score you can get between 0 to 10 that gives you an indication of the amount of trauma a person has experienced in their childhood. I'll tell you a bit more about that as we progress. And then we presented kind of trauma theory, some of what Joe just pointed out there. I'll tell you a bit more of the specificity of what we presented, trauma theory, and then the results of this research. And we presented that to the police officers engaged in the youth diversion work and to youth workers working with the same cohort to see how it landed with them. We're like, does this mean anything to you? How does this feel to you? What would you like to do with this information? So it was very much a collaborative piece that we did with them. So I'll tell you what their reactions and responses were, which will lead us into kind of the recommendation that was developed. And then Colette will tell you kind of how the police in Ireland are looking at that in the next section. So we're running into each other really. What we did an anonymous case file analysis. So what that means is youth workers who were working closely with young people who are involved in the Garda Youth Diversion Project sat down, went through the young people's files, and then talked to their colleagues. And they had a checklist. And the aim was tick as many of these that you are absolutely 100% sure that the young person has experienced. So no data ever came to our desk with people's names attached. So we were able to really safely manage a lot of the ethical issues around that. The big danger with that methodology is like, well, they just guess and think, yeah, that probably happened. We were very careful, number one, that we had methods that didn't mean they just drifted towards finding the most traumatized kids and including them in the research. So we had some kind of steps and precautions taken for that. And then we said, unless you are 100% sure that this happened to that young person, tick no. So the data that I'm going to present to you, which is jarring enough as it is likely an underreporting of the prevalence of these experiences among the young people in contact with the criminal justice system. And then after we'd done all that, as I just mentioned, we presented it to the JLOs, Juvenile Liaison Officers. JLO is the police working with the young people in the Gardaí Diversion Programme in Dublin and Cork. So that was our methodology, and we wrote that up into the report there. So the young people, there were predominantly boys, some girls, largely reflective, I think, of the gender profile of people engaged with the criminal justice service at all ages and internationally and everything. So nothing surprising here. The ages of the young people who are profiled, most of them in the middle at 14 or 15. The important thing that shows us, though, with this cohort is that unfortunately they haven't probably experienced everything they're going to experience in terms of adversity and trauma. So again, that will lead to an underreporting of the overall cohort if you were to take it as they graduated through into adulthood. So 14 and 15, some 16, 17, some 12 and 13. There was 125 in total, by the way. This just is a quick overview of ACE scores. If you're not that familiar with what ACE scores mean, this graph won't mean a huge amount to you. If you're really into this, you will be you will notice the significance. I'm going to tell you more about why these numbers are significant in a minute, so just bear with me on that. But what you see here is that there's quite a lot moving from 4 upwards here. And then we have 3 downwards, very few at 0 and 1. I'm going to talk to you about that now in a minute. So an important thing, and people who understand trauma and are involved in trauma research will know that with ACE scores, and this is one of the many measures of trauma, it's just one thing that helps us understand all this stuff, is that where people have 4 or more of these ACEs, where their ACE score is 4 or more, they're in a cohort that are statistically significantly more likely to experience a range of negative life outcomes. So health, physical, mental, social, emotional, all that stuff. Look, honestly, with this stuff, it's just putting data on what we already know. We already know when you've experienced these adversities, people get sicker, people have a harder time in life. And this really gives us the data to substantiate that, the ACE score stuff did. But we also asked them not just about those ACEs, those 10 things. We asked them about a couple of other factors that are either associated as a kind of contributing factor to engagement with the criminal justice services, or something that can come from having a higher trauma load. So we asked about whether they're from a disadvantaged area, and what we meant by that in the explainer was like higher levels of crime, higher levels of economic disadvantage. And we asked them what their employment or education status was. We asked, had they been in state care, so in a group home or foster care, and if they had 4 or 5 cautions. Cautions is the formal warning given by the police officer. Colette might explain that a bit better. But so what we saw was that there was a positive relationship between all of these things and their ACE scores. Okay, so it's not statistically significant, just to kind of, we didn't have the numbers to establish statistical significance, if that means anything to those of you who are interested in the nuances of research in that way. But we've identified patterns that replicate what we know from research everywhere, which is, again, higher trauma load, more likely to be engaged in the criminal justice with police officers in a more serious manner, more likely to have come from an area of disadvantage, more likely to drop out of school or not have a job, all of these kind of things that we know. So the next slide is where I'm going to show you what ACEs mean, for those of you who don't know. Bear with me, those of you who know this really well, and what it means in terms of comparison to ACE scores in other populations. So over here, for those of you who don't know ACEs, these are these things, the little, can you see my little cursor moving there? Emotional, physical, sexual, all that stuff, abuse, neglect, parental incarceration, severe parental mental health issues. These are all ACEs, and it's like, have you experienced these things before the age of 18? And you tick, and each yes you tick is a 1, and you can get a score up to 10. In here, in this green column, is the scores of the young people in this study. And then over here, it's some research to compare it. So we have some from the United States, and then some here in Ireland as well. So we wanted to look at national stats. The first study here in the United States is the big one. It's the one where all the ACE data came from back in the day, Felitti et al. Study. And what they found, and research has replicated this very often, is that people who had no ACEs at all, 36% of the population, will be very fortunate to have no ACEs. Good on them. In this study, only 4% of the young people had no ACEs. When we did research with women who were using probation, homeless, or addiction services, 4% of them had no ACEs. And in a homeless service, nobody had no ACEs. This was a homeless shelter that was like very, very unwell people living in a homeless shelter. You see similar patterns for 1 ACE, 4 or more ACEs. That golden number, that's a misnomer because it's definitely not very golden at all. It's horrible. 4 or more ACEs. The young people in this study, 63% had 4 or more ACEs. In the general population, only 12.5% of people will. In the 2 studies in Ireland, and sorry, that's a criminal justice comparator, so it's the same. In these services in Ireland, 78% of people in the homeless service had 4 or more, 71% in the women's service had 4 or more. Now, given that we predict that there's a good bit of underreporting in this research, it might explain why there's a bit of a difference between those two. Does this mean that the young people engaged with these diversion services are going to end up here? Well, no, it's not deterministic. But it does put a very, very compelling case to all of those of us with any kind of power to change this, to look at what we can do to prevent this from happening. Huge. Okay, that's all the stats. I'm now going to ask anyone who's here to shift the brain into being a worker mode. So imagine yourself a police officer who's working with these young people, or a youth worker working with these young people. And what does all this mean to you? Okay, so I'm going to just tell you a little bit, for those of you who don't know, a little teach on what trauma does to how we communicate and engage, and what that might mean for youth justice police officers and youth workers. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is a concept called the window of tolerance. Have any of you heard of it? I'm sure lots of you have heard of it. For those of you who haven't, the window of tolerance is a concept for understanding our kind of mental state at any given point in time. Okay, so in this green box, this is when you're, as we say in Ireland, when you're totally grand, right? When everything's okay, when you're feeling in control. I'm totally in my optimal arousal zone now because I like presenting and I'm passionate about this stuff, so I'm happy. I'm able to communicate with you. I'm able to empathize with those of you who might not know what I'm saying when I say Garda or ACE. So I'm able to think about your experiences. I feel safe psychologically, so I'm not worried and feeling threatened. I can think straight and I can communicate. Okay, so that's when you're in your optimal arousal zone. Someone gives, like, when you're outside of that optimal arousal zone, so that's when you start to feel psychologically unsafe for some reason. That can be because you've been triggered into a negative past experience, because someone is squaring up to you, whatever it might be, or something feels threatening. You are knocked out of your window of tolerance. Now, think of young people, right? And engaging with young people. So you're knocked out of your window of tolerance. You can go up into hyper arousal, okay? And this all, I'm speaking in very generic terms, but there's a very strong body of neuroscience behind this. And you can talk about hormonal systems and parts of the brain and different things like that, but let's keep it in general language that we can all understand and that I can actually communicate in, because I'm not a neuroscientist. So you're hyper aroused. So that means you're agitated, you're defensive. So you're in kind of the fight or flight. So what's happening is your body's preparing for a fight. So you are losing the capacity to think. You can't think straight. You're defensive because you're waiting for an attack. You're agitated, you're tense, you're shaking, you're angry. You might look cross, agitated, red-faced, all that stuff. So that's hyper aroused. You can't think straight, just to be really clear about these things, and you can't communicate properly. The other side of it, less obvious a lot of the time, is hyper arousal, and that's when you go low, and that's the grand, fine. That's the shutdown and the disengagement. The animal playing dead when there's a predator coming for it. It's like very much wired into our biology sometimes to shut down when we feel threatened. Okay, so you're numb, your speech might slow down, you are absent, you're flat, you can't say no very often, your capacity to actually assert yourself is gone. So these are being outside of your window of tolerance. Now, why is this important? Because people who have experienced chronic trauma that they have not been given the support to process will spend far more time outside of their window of tolerance. Not only that, they will be knocked out of it more easily, and they will have a much harder time getting back into it. So when you're walking in to an engagement with someone in authority who you are frightened of, there's a fair chance that most of these young people are out of their window of tolerance most of the time when they're engaging with juvenile liaison officers, police officers in any description. It helps us to understand people's behavior a little bit more. Okay, and there's another model and another, and for those of you who are interested in this area, you might be familiar with the work of Sandra Bloom. So Sandra Bloom talks about trauma organized behaviors, and trauma organized behaviors will be those behaviors that evolve as coping mechanisms for people who are living with the effects of trauma, who feel a lot of the time psychologically unsafe and have developed behaviors to keep themselves safe throughout the course of their life. And she calls this trauma organized behaviors. I often think of them as kind of chronic behaviors. Now, the really important thing is these behaviors were developed by people to keep themselves safe because we have such a strong survival instinct as humans. So they're actually a strength. They might not always work in your favor when you're trying to talk to a cop or whatever might be going on, but the fact is they evolved in you. I'll tell you briefly about one or two of them because they're just fascinating. We as creatures are fascinating how we develop these things. An inability to grieve and anticipate the future. If you spend most of your time in survival mode, just trying to keep yourself safe, you're not going to have a huge capacity to look backwards and regret or look forwards and plan. What does that mean when people are trying to talk to young people about the consequences of their behavior and all that kind of stuff? Problems with authority. If you are a person who's experienced a lot of interpersonal trauma at the hands of people who are supposed to take care of you, it is very likely that your baseline starting point, anyone in authority, is that they are going to hurt you and you cannot feel safe with them. Therefore, you're out of your window of tolerance with them, etc., etc., etc. Okay. A lack of basic safety and trust. If as an infant you didn't have your needs met, if the response to you crying in your crib was to be ignored or to be hurt, that very basic sense of safety and their neural pathways that develop in our brains that tell us whether the world is safe or not. If you don't have that capacity to feel safe may not be there. And that again impacts on how we're behaving and how we're engaging, etc., etc. Loss of emotional management. Problems with cognition, that one's fascinating because if you're out of your window of tolerance, you can't think straight anyway. But if you have spent your whole life pretty much in fight or flight, your prefrontal cortex that does a lot of that strategic thinking isn't going to be very well engaged. That muscle isn't going to be hugely well developed. So you're not necessarily going to be able to think as quickly about things you're not used to having to think about. Communication problems, confused sense of fair play. It's a huge one when you're talking about criminal justice. Like if I have never been treated fairly by people who are supposed to care for me, by society, whatever the case may be, it's safer instinctually for me to presume that you are not being fair to me because I'm a little bit more likely to get my needs met. If I just presume you're not being fair, it might be a little bit safer for me. On a biological level, a lot of this stuff isn't happening on a really well-considered cognitive level. It's how we're just behaving moment to moment. So if you're a juvenile liaison officer or a youth worker, what we found when we deliver this training and when we presented it to the juvenile liaison officers as part of this research, but we present it in training all the time, a couple of things happens for people who learn it. And I don't know what's happening for you guys listening to this.
Last 2 minutes, Aoife.
Great, thank you. But they say, oh, I thought it was me that he was always furious. They start to depersonalize. They start to go, oh, I think I understand where this behavior is coming from. So what did they say when we presented it? Well, they said, yeah, this is amazing. It's giving us a language for something we instinctively knew to be true. So it's building on the natural professional intelligence of people who already understand this. They recognize that they already use some of this, the police officers did in their day-to-day practices. You know, one officer in this quote talked about how he went in his uniform once, realized that it triggered the kid, went back without his uniform on, and the starting point is much safer for the child because the uniform was a trigger. This person here says if the family, if he knows the parents, he'll send someone else in because he knows the child can't feel safe with them. So these are all examples, but they said that they weren't taught it systematically. They learned it from their colleagues and peers, some good practices, but it wasn't embedded as, it wasn't a language that was used, it wasn't a training that was given. So they learned it from each other, but not systematically. The big danger with that is, of course, that you can also learn from mistakes that wouldn't have been made if you'd known this stuff in the first place. So they talked about how negative interactions with other police officers in the past had made the young people naturally more afraid to be around any kind of Garda police officer, and that they carry it forward as the words they used in terms of all interactions with the police. So a lack of understanding of trauma and its impact can actually affect your relationship with the person. The Gardaí, the police that we presented to, unanimously supported the idea that they would it would improve their practice by understanding trauma theory a bit better. I thought this quote was gorgeous. When a kid is smashing something up, he's telling you something he can't say. It was lovely, just such a lovely way to put it. And many of them agreed. So this was the really interesting thing, loads of caveats and critical engagement. They're like, look, what the JLOs, the youth officers can do, and the Gardaí, the police on the beat on the street, are two extremely different things. We're going to have to make sure if we're doing something like this, it's tailored to the unique culture of the different departments and indeed of the organization itself. So being in this session where people are talking about trauma-informed policing, it's so great that some of the groundwork has already been done in how that will work. And the recommendation that arose from the research then was looking at a pilot. So training some local JLOs and then other professionals working with the young people in the areas, an interagency multidisciplinary approach in a geographical region with a robust evaluation element, building on the experiences of other jurisdictions where this has been done to develop a model and evaluate that. So thank you very much for your time, and obviously any questions or comments I'm very happy to take. Cheers.
Thank you, Aoife. What an excellent presentation. I'm sure there's going to be lots of interesting questions. Can I move swiftly on to Colette, please? Colette, you're on mute.
Okay, yeah, here I am. Hello, everybody, again. Can you see my screen? Is it up there? It is. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and you can see the screen.
All perfect.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, okay. Well, okay. Listen. First thing I need to say is again, great opportunity to be on this, I suppose, international stage, talking about our project and what we sort of, knew, and maybe what we learned, and what we hope to do in the future, having had the experience, and also share with yourselves. And already, I'm sure you can see from what Joe and Aoife has said, the whole value, I suppose, of collective leadership is beginning to emerge. And again, I suppose the presentation right now is, and the topic here is the organization change perspective. So we're moving away from perhaps a small initiative to maybe making it more streamlined into the general population of the police service here. So, and also into the how we approach our youth justice delivery in Ireland per se. So just to move these things on, yeah, here we go. So just justice in Ireland, what does it look like? So I suppose the first thing to say is that Ireland has embraced the concept of child-friendly justice and obligations under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child through the enactment of our own Children's Act in 2001. Now, we're signed up to the UN Convention since the early 90s. So this is the enactment. We have Diversion Programme from the early 60s that was non-statutory, but then that moved into a statutory environment once we sort of moved from embracing the convention expectations and then formulating that into a piece of legislation called the Children's Act, which has been amended to some degree through other amendments. So again, the Diversion Programme is part of the Act, as I said earlier on, and perhaps from the point of view of just giving you a little bit of a background, an introduction, I might say a few words about it as a way of supporting child-friendly justice and acting in the best interest of the child principle. And again, as I said earlier, Ireland might be somewhat unique in its approach to youth justice, as the legal responsibility for the administration of the programme rests with the police service here. Children who it is alleged to have committed a criminal offence must by law be referred to the programme for consideration on their suitability to be dealt with via the programme and not to the criminal courts in Ireland. I suppose the overarching aim is to intervene at the earliest opportunity and to divert children from further offending and away from the harshness, and that word comes up a lot in terms of dealing with young people in the criminal justice system, but the of the system can be difficult for children, indeed for anybody, but certainly for children. And then the other part of that hybrid part of our effort is to address any welfare or unmet needs that have contributed to the offending behaviour in the first place. And that very much brings us to today's story, where we're looking at trauma as a factor in that case. And just finally, I suppose this part, I'd like to say that it's a police officer at superintendent rank. So it's somebody at a high level in the organisation that is a legal officer who decides on the suitability of a child for admission to the programme. And of course, there's a whole process around that in its own right. And then, as Aoife referred to earlier, I have a cadre of specially trained police officers called Garda Youth and Juvenile Liaison Officers who engage with children who are admitted to the programme. Also, very helpfully, our Department of Justice, and we're just currently in the process, and it'll probably be launched now in the next few weeks. The department are responsible for our youth justice policy, and as you might expect, this policy is developed with the input of a variety of stakeholders, including ourselves, but also, you know, NGOs and other service providers, right, that have a role and provide a service to young people, not just, you know, our established departments within, say, for example, our education department and our health department, so other stakeholders as well. Incidentally, I suppose at this time it's interesting that we are just about to launch our youth justice strategy, and very much centre to that is the embracing of the whole area of trauma-informed services. And again, that's right across the department, not just for the youth sector. It's actually the whole idea that the Department of Justice here in Ireland would like to build trauma-informed services at every stage of the criminal justice system in order to build capacity within the workplace for the future. So that's all good news from our point of view. So again, back to the exploratory study that we committed to with Youth Rise and Quality Matters and University College Cork. I suppose what our aim was there, and Aoife has very clearly set out for you earlier on, was to conduct an exploratory study of early life trauma and their implications for our Garda youth diversion services. We already recognised as an organisation and through our work that a great many of our children involved in the criminal justice system had been exposed to trauma. And the research certainly backs up our concerns in that regard, and it tells us that the young people within our system have had approximately 3 times more adverse childhood experiences than that of the average population, and perhaps are 4 times more likely to have experienced 4 or more ACEs. So that in itself was a great indicator and a great marker for us. From a delivery point of view, we wanted to get some understanding of how well informed our JLOs were and our youth workers, because we deliver the service in partnership with our youth workers, how well informed they were of the impact of trauma and adverse childhood experiences on the children that they were actually working with. So the findings, as Aoife has said to you, and I won't go into them in too much detail, but just from maybe our perspective as a police service, the study involved the analysis of case files, as you heard earlier, and interviews with both youth workers and JLOs. And then the profile of the young person in the study was found to mirror closely that of the population. Aoife said that were found to be in homeless settings, probation and other were availing of substance support services. So overall, the findings highlighted that in that population, there was the importance of effective intervention, engagement, and diversion strategies to help build resilience. The study also found that juvenile liaison officers and youth workers know about this intuitively, and as Aoife said earlier on, while they had a sense of it within their day-to-day work, they weren't given any specific training to sort of embed the practice or embed the understanding. So the emphasis, you know, what was interesting about the outcome around all that was that there was some sort of an innate one, whether it was by mentoring or whether it was picked up by a trial and error, which Aoife also referred to, because some people can pick up poor practices as well as happening on good practice because of certain situations they find themselves or may meet. But the emphasis on building relationships and rapport between the young person and the professional was really what came out of the study. And also those findings were that those experiences were safe, they were supportive and trustful, they were trusting, and they were also respectful. So those kind of 4 key behaviours between the youth worker and the juvenile liaison officer really helped young people, I suppose, navigate and address some of the traumas that they were experiencing. The study also highlighted a number of opportunities for ourselves, and it's hoped that, you know, through the use of the new strategy, we can promote a trauma-informed justice system, which is what we'd like to do following the next iteration, if you will, of our efforts. So again, just to sort of maybe finish off on this point around next steps, the evidence suggested that a trauma-informed justice system can enhance people's resilience and well-being and help them to reduce aggressive behaviours and the chances of recidivism, which is a key finding. In the context of organisational change and support for trauma-informed policing, the building of workforce capacity and raising awareness among staff through awareness campaigns, training and buy-in from police leaders, I believe will be critical to moving forward towards a trauma-informed organisation. And I will say at this stage, my own Assistant Commissioner is on the conference call today and very much supports the work. So we're certainly going to continue to build on what we have just started, which is good news. Hopefully we'll continue to work with Youth Rise, Quality Matters and the University College Cork as well as partners, because we have found that relationship, and again back to what Joe and Aoife was saying earlier about that leadership across I suppose expertise and across experiences has definitely worked for the initial project. And then building on that, we have and through this conference and preparing for this conference, thanks to Justin and colleagues in the UK, we have we'll hopefully start a liaison with ourselves in the UK, particularly in Lancaster Constabulary, where a significant amount of groundwork, I must say, has already been done. So we're going to piggyback on that and learn from and benefit from their experiences. So that's my contribution for the moment, and I'm happy to take any questions that might come at this stage. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Colette. There's going to be a lot of questions on that, I think. I certainly have quite a few, and thank you for the plug for Lancashire. Dee, have we got any chance of getting the video from Andy Rhodes up, do you think?
Well, we're going to try again. See if
give it a minute or two. And if not, I've got about 30 questions here, so that's good.
All right, as I hit play here, just give me a shout if you can't hear the sound.
Hi, my name is Chief Constable Andy Rhodes. I'm the Chief of Lancashire Police in the northwest of the UK. And I've also been doing a lot of work nationally around trauma-informed practice and ACE awareness. My talk today is basically to introduce 3 amazing case studies, speakers from Wales and Garda, who are going to talk about studies that they've done around ACE and how they're using trauma-informed practice also as a model of change. I've talked previously about system leadership, particularly across agencies that work with vulnerable groups of people, and how challenging that can be. So my introduction today is going to talk about how language is very important to find common ground with other leaders of other organisations within our system. I'm also going to talk about how, starting with our own people who work in our agencies and our organisations, who often have a trauma-heavy workload, experiences at work that are very difficult for them to deal with, and often bring ACEs themselves into the workplace, sometimes consciously, sometimes subconsciously. And how, starting with them, in terms of workforce development, can actually really accelerate some of the change and the cultural change across the system so that we all understand the lived experience of the people that we are out there trying to support day to day. And then I'm going to talk about, the sort of things that I think the mindset shift ACEs and trauma-informed practice can bring to people who work on the front line of our services. So the first thing that I always start with is, when you're talking to leaders from other organisations, they've all, we can all find, maybe we've got different objectives, we've got different challenges every day, we're all spinning plates, but we can all find a shared purpose, the why question. And starting with the why question, I found with leaders in other organisations is a very powerful way to open up a conversation around things like ACEs and trauma-informed practice. Because my experience of this conversation is that many senior people at executive level in big organisations are concerned that this is going to increase demand on already stretched services. That's a legitimate concern that they might have, because if we're overwhelmed with demand, and let's face it, folks, we're all very, very busy anyway, worrying about unlocking new demand can be a real concern for people. And I think that's why it's really important to get this conversation out first. This is something that I think is really important to recognise in a lot of frontline staff in critical services, that they are working in a really difficult environment and they're experiencing suffering and loss on a daily basis. They're experiencing really tough intergenerational poverty, exploitation, sometimes violence. And, it's heart-wrenching, isn't it, for those people who work at the front end of our organisations. I've been there, I've experienced it. I know that the impact it can have on my mindset. It can make my mindset become quite defensive at times. And certainly risk aversion is a problem that all organisations that work in this space have to tackle. Why it's important to understand the policing brain. The police work frontline, often the first people to respond to people in crisis, people struggling because they are being abused, they've been exploited, children in child protection jobs. And over time, a defensive sort of mechanism can kick in. And your worldview can change very quickly when you join the police. Pejorative, pessimistic and permanent. This is a really troubling mindset for many of us who work in frontline services in this area. And it can mean that we lose a lot of our meaning with our work. It can make us feel that we're not achieving anything on a day-to-day basis. And we can also suffer from compassion fatigue. In the bottom right-hand corner of this slide is the sort of model for positive psychology. If you look in there, positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning and accomplishment, sometimes our work can be the antithesis of that. So I think when we're developing trauma-informed practice, when we talk about ACEs, we're also seeking to regain our compassion and increase our meaning and achievement at work, because that is something that's fantastic for the lifeblood of our organisations. And it's something we all start with, but can be lost in the world that we work in. So let's start with ourselves, know thyself. Our brains are all wired up the same way. Some of the most successful ACE awareness programmes that I've seen, ACE recovery work, trauma-informed practice, starts with looking at ourselves. If you work in an organisation that experiences a lot of trauma, actually tapping into your workforce using CPD to say, do you realise, and let's talk about and explore what impact that exposure to trauma is having on your brain. And then you make the link directly to the client groups that those people work with, because we all share the same brain processing. And it is a very similar experience, and there's a similar impact on our brains from experiencing high levels of trauma in our work, as well as looking at people experiencing a high level of trauma in areas like ACEs. So that is something that I think I have seen Pretty tough groups of frontline police officers go light bulb moment when they've started thinking, yeah, that's how I've started to see the world. That actually does happen to me, hypervigilance. Yeah, I do find it difficult to pay attention to things outside of the work environment and the levels of stress that they experience. I think that is a real opportunity. Done in a safe and supportive way, it's a great avenue in to introduce your workforce to trauma-informed practice and ACEs. The power of lived experience, I cannot underestimate this. We know, and all the great programs that we talk about around ACEs and trauma-informed practice, place people who are confident enough to talk about their lived experience, for example, as victims of child sexual exploitation, of abuse, of being trafficked, and sit down in front of frontline practitioners to share their experiences. Again, in a safe and supportive environment. I have spoken to police officers with 20, 30 years experience who've said, I didn't know that that person I was taking home to their family when they were missing from home, I was taking them home to be abused. And when they're confronted with their lived experiences, live cases in the places they work with the people that they've got experience of, it can really be a massive wake-up call in terms of changing the conversation. So that we start to realise and we start bringing meaning back into our work, that one little conversation can change things forever. I know numerous people who are recovering from a life of alcohol and drug addiction, who had horrendous abuse in their early lives. The people that I've chased around in my earlier service, arresting them for burgling houses. And I know that the things that change their lives are conversations. May have been somebody, a prison officer who spoke to them with some respect. It may have been a police officer. I know one person who said one conversation with a police officer at the right moment changed the course of their life and helped them access the support they needed. You change your language and you change your thoughts. So I think this is about, as a system, the leadership of our organisation starting to change our language and starting to enthuse our people and bring back into their working lives meaning and achievement, which is what they all joined the job to do. So I put this slide together. On the left-hand side, I think this is what we can achieve as organisations. This is around our culture as well as every individual. We move from judging based on what we see today to understanding how you got here. We move from losing our meaning and purpose to understanding that actually, even though we may be having 1,000 conversations a week, maybe just one of those conversations is the one that's going to change someone's life. We move from thinking that we're surviving traumatic stress to a mindset where we are growing as a person because of our experiences with trauma. And we're looking at emotionally driven decisions, more rational decisions based on facts, data, and understanding the whole picture about a person's life rather than just what we are feeling and seeing at the moment we have the interaction with them. And we move from data overload to attention focus because a lot of our people are overloaded with data. So whether it's head or heart, there is an incredibly strong argument for organisations to adopt trauma-informed practice, looking at the social determinants of vulnerability, of crime, looking at the client groups that we work with very differently. That's not to say that we don't still do our job in policing, but there is a business case for this that is all about better decisions, reduced risk, improved motivation and development of our staff. The heart argument is there already, folks. I shouldn't have to go through that with you, but I think quite a few senior leaders who are looking at the finances and the demand feel overwhelmed. They often don't feel as though they've got a lot of heart in this. So you've got to appeal to the head and the heart. So the final slide from me is to tee up the presenters today, who all have this incredible thing called data. It's not opinion, it's not all heart. There's a lot of stuff in here around these are facts, this is research, this is evaluation. It proves that we can do things very differently if we look at our work through a trauma-informed lens, and particularly using ACEs as a conversation tool. So we've got Joe Hopkins and Sean Kelly from Early Action Together and the ACEs Hub in Wales. We've got Aoife Dermody from Quality Matters, who's been working with the Garda Youth Services on early life trauma. And we've got Chief Superintendent Colette Quinn from the Garda Youth Division, who is looking at how trauma-informed practice can change culture and actually change the national youth justice system in Southern Ireland. So fantastic presenters, folks. Really looking forward to hear them. And thanks for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. We are a bit short of time. It's a big thank you to Dee for managing to get our technical support back online again. So thank you, Dee. A couple of questions from the floor. So I'm going to start with one that was asked very early on. I'm going to ask it to the whole panel. It's from Jennifer Thompson, and it's she's curious about how you address trauma within your own organisations, particularly those policing. Should we start with you, Colette? Colette, you're on mute. Colette, you're still on mute. Colette, hello?
Hello. Yeah, there I am.
Better.
Okay, sorry about that. Great question, actually, because I think that is in itself how we deal with trauma internally, because as Aoife has rightly pointed out, while we're focusing on trauma with our young people that we're meeting, we also have to take a step back and look at what trauma are our people that are actually doing the day job are they experiencing, not just within their own life, which is, you know, they could also have, you know, many ACEs, but also then the impact of that journey right through with the young person that they're dealing with and understanding their trauma, and then where does that sit and how do we actually manage that out for them so that, you know, that they stay healthy and well, and that the organization recognizes that, you know, we're in a very, you know, we're in a complex and mainly it's conflict in many occasions when you're in a policing environment, particularly where things go wrong. It's very stressful for even on a, you know, I mean, even not for a traffic stop, for goodness sakes, people can get traumatized when they see a police officer. So all that is, you know, an underlying thing that's going on that perhaps we might be aware of it, as we found out in our little research study, that our people are quite good and quite aware, but we don't actually haven't bedded it down as a concept, as a reality, as an issue that needs to be dealt in terms of our well-being, so that we can stay well as an organization, individually and collectively, and then work, you know, coming to the workplace with an understanding that trauma very much is part of a lot of the people we interact with. So therefore that has to have an impact on ourselves, plus the day-to-day living. We all have a certain amount of trauma that you know, life doesn't go swimmingly for everybody. So there's that need, and I think Andy said it really well when he said that it really is about the buy-in from a leadership perspective. You know, we on the ground can do lots of different things. People do great work on the ground, but if they don't have that support, understanding and conversation going on at a leadership level, then, you know, we're missing a trick, and it's going to take us longer to get there. And I think the other thing I just say in certain my environment, which gives me a lot of hope, is that our Department of Justice is really buying into the understanding and notion. So there's a conversation happening somewhere around the place